Glorious day, fellow traveler. Welcome to Science and God with Dr. G. That's me, Dr. Michael Gillen, physicist, astronomer, mathematician, and Christian. That's right, living, breathing evidence that science and Christianity are not mortal enemies, but good friends. Actually, an awesome power couple. Let me ask you a question. How old are you? Truth is, there's more than one correct answer to that question. The same goes for the question, how old is the universe? That's what I want to talk to you about today, okay? So here goes. Back in journey number 8, I explained that both science and the Bible agree that absolute truths do exist, which is a really big deal. Well, guess what? Science and the Bible also agree that relative truths exist, and that time is one of them. Time is not an absolute truth. It depends on your reference frame. Listen to how emphatic the Bible is on the subject of time. In 2 Peter 3:8 it says, "But do not forget this one thing, dear friends. With the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day." You can forget about a lot of things, friend, but the Bible is commanding you and me, do not forget this one thing. Time is a relative truth. It's not an absolute truth. Let me say that again. According to the Bible, in God's reference frame, which exists outside of time, a day, 1,000 years, it's all the same to him. Time is God's plaything, and it's elastic, like silly putty. He can stretch a day into 1,000 years without any problem. Now, what about you and me? We're not God. We don't inhabit his timeless spiritual universe. Time is not our plaything. If anything, we're time's plaything. It can do whatever it wants to us. We age and we die. And not all the skin creams and health foods in the world can change that. There's nothing we can do about it. That's true. All of that's true. But even in our fallen world, time is elastic. A day, 1,000 years, it all depends on the reference frame. Time is not the same for everyone, everywhere in the physical universe. So for example, suppose you tell me, Dr. G, I'm 25 years old. What you're really saying is you're 25 Earth years old, right? Mars, the planet Mars, has longer years than Earth. So in its reference frame, you're only 13 years old. Imagine that, you're a teenager. Venus has shorter years, so in its reference frame, you're already 40. And since the planet Mercury has really short years, I hate to tell you, but you've already got one foot in the grave. You're 103 years old, going on 104. All right, so are you 25 years old, 13 years old, 40, 103 years old? Well, yes, 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 and yes. And somewhere in the universe, believe it or not, there's even a reference frame, inside a black hole, for instance, where you're already dead. But let's go even deeper. Suppose someone asks you and me, what time is it? Well, I live in the Central Time Zone. But if you live in a different time zone, a different reference frame, your answer will not agree with mine. Who's right, who's wrong? We're both right. What's more, there's a simple way to calculate the difference between our two reference frames, and thus settle any argument between us. Once I see time from your point of view, and you see time from my point of view, we won't ever argue. And here's an even more beautiful thing. Last century, Albert Einstein came up with equations that let you and me see time from any reference frame anywhere in the cosmos. That's a really big deal, because we can now settle any argument among any reference frames about who's right and who's wrong. We now know they're all right because time is relative. Hey there, breaking in for just a second to tell you about COVID-19. There's so much misinformation out there. That's why I started a video series on YouTube called Going Viral with Dr. G. Every week I help you digest the screaming and scary headlines so you and your loved ones can always feel well-informed and safe. Simply go to my website, michaelgillen.com, and click on the YouTube button. All right, now back to the podcast. Now let's go even deeper into our journey, okay? Don't worry, I'm not going to go full nerd on you. Trust me. Okay, close your eyes and imagine that your best friend is taking off to Mars in one of Elon Musk's beautiful rocket ships. There you are, waving goodbye. Goodbye. As she speeds up, something very strange is happening. Inside that rocket ship, inside that reference frame, time is slowing down. Your friend's expensive wristwatch is slowing down. Her pulse is slowing down. Her body's aging is slowing down. Inside that speeding reference frame, everything involving time is slowing down. But not to worry, because you and she can use Einstein's equations to calculate the difference between your two reference frames. So you and she won't argue about who's right and who's wrong. You're both right. Okay, so now that you understand how time works, let me finish up by asking you that other question I started with. How old is the universe? Now, if you've been listening carefully, and I know you have, right? Then you know there are many correct answers to that question. It depends on the reference frame, that's all. Let's start with our ordinary physical earthly reference frame. According to our latest best astronomical measurements, the universe is about 13.8 billion Earth years old, all right? But what about the Bible? Well, it never comes out and tells us how old the universe is. But it does say that God assembled it all in just 6 days. Now, skeptics scoff at that. But remember, time is not an absolute truth. It's relative. So there is a reference frame somewhere in the cosmos where it took 6 days for the universe to be created. What reference frame might that be? Well, since in the beginning there was no one and nothing on the scene but God, it's reasonable to suppose it's his reference frame the Bible is describing. So people, skeptics and Christians alike, can argue all they want about who's right and who's wrong, about how long it took the universe to happen. But it's really a silly argument, a pointless argument, because it's quite possible they're all right. It's possible they're all just reckoning time from different reference frames, maybe without even realizing it. And anyway, who of us can claim to know what it's like to inhabit God's reference frame? I know I certainly can't, not even with all my scientific degrees. And remember what it says in 2 Peter. Do not forget this one thing, dear friends. With the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. Don't forget that in God's reference frame, the one described throughout the entire Bible, not just Genesis, time is a plaything. God could have easily created the universe in 6 microseconds, never mind 6 days. So, fellow traveler, please don't let yourself be drawn into a silly argument about who's right and who's wrong when it comes to matters of time. Explain 3 things to anyone who wants to argue with you. First, explain that science and the Bible agree absolute truths do exist, and because of them, there are absolute rights and absolute wrongs. Second, explain that science and the Bible also agree time is not an absolute truth. So when it comes to reckoning the age of someone or something, including the age of the universe, there is no absolute right and no absolute wrong. And third, explain that worse than arguing over a relative truth is staking your whole life on it. As a scientist and as a Christian, I stake my life, my faith in God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit on absolute truths. And chief among them is the absolute truth that time is relative. Okay, that's it for now. Remember, this podcast is not a lecture series. It's a conversation. So now it's your turn. Comments? Questions? I'm eager to hear from you. There's all kinds of ways you can connect up with me via my social media links in the show notes below.